And Miss Nikole Hannah Jones, what about this series is really resonating with people? Like copies were sold out initially, physical copies for sure, and you've had a record number of podcasts to listen to. What about this project is really resonating with everybody?
I think there are a couple of things. One, the story that we're telling is a story that really reframes the way that we have been taught, not just about American history, but about the role that Black Americans have played and the role of slavery as foundational really to our culture, our politics, and our society. And this is just a history that most Americans, no matter what their race, have not really learned. The other thing is our language, I think, is very unflinching. I think people appreciate that we weren't holding anything back. We were not afraid with the language. And I think the other thing is the kind of conceit of the magazine is that this actually is not a history. The magazine is saying that you can look all across a modern American life and things that you think have nothing to do with race or slavery, such as traffic patterns or why we consume so much sugar or why we don't have universal health care, that you can look across all of these aspects of modern American life and we could trace them back to slavery. So I think that reframing for people has been very powerful. And the last thing I would say is with who is currently in the White House, people are really looking for understanding. They want to understand how did we get here, how in 2019, after the historic election of our first Black president, did this country then go on to elect someone that many consider to be a white nationalist. And the 1619 Project, because it is so deeply historical, but also ties in this original sin to so many of the problems we struggle with today, I think many people feel is a roadmap to how we got here, and it provides understanding.
And jumping off of what you were just stating of the different essays that have been written dealing with sugar or capitalism or traffic in Atlanta and how that has been traced to slavery, I'm very curious to know when you and your team was devising this magazine, what came first, the understanding of how slavery impacted these very systems that we lived in, or tracing the systems that we experience every day and live in to slavery?
It's kind of the same question.
Sorry. But as far as like when people were constructing the essays, did it first come to mind about like, oh, I wonder like if capitalism traces
Oh, no.
back to slavery, and then you guys did the essay on that, or you looked through like chronologically through history and saw how slavery progressively affected like capitalism and traffic?
When I conceived of the project, I knew that I wanted it to be about modern American life. So, as we were deciding what stories were going to be in there, we were starting with the present, not the past. So, we were saying what things about modern American life that impact almost all Americans can be traced back to slavery. And we came up with a list from there. I really wanted this project to answer that question that Black people get all the time, which is slavery ended 150 years ago, why don't you get over it? And I wanted to show that our country has not gotten over it, and that it is impacting every American, whether you're white, Black, immigrant, Native American, that the legacy of slavery impacts us all and that it is alive today. So it wasn't about looking at the past and going forward, it was looking at the present and going backwards.
And do you think that you could have envisioned the impact that this project would have had? Obviously, the concept of slavery upon itself has not fully been looked upon and has not been discussed upon in the right ways and fully and extensively as it is in this magazine, for example. And so, have you and your team witnessed wonderful feedback? Not just wonderful feedback, but feedback about how it's changing lives or changing classroom settings or changing the way people think about our history so far?
So let me just first say, this is not original scholarship. We rely very heavily on scholarship being done by amazing scholars all across this country, but what you find in the project is not common knowledge. So there are people who have been studying this forever, but it hasn't been kind of put in one place for general public to consume, and I think also not making the type of particular argument that the project is making. So I just want to make sure to shout out all of the scholarship that we relied upon to do it. But no, we had no idea that it would land in the world as it did. We didn't, I certainly had no expectations on how people would react to it, whether people would really want it or respond to it, because it's about slavery, and it's about one of the worst things this country has ever done, and something that we've spent really 400 years trying to cover up. So I was really surprised by the reaction to it. I knew that we were trying to create something very powerful. I knew the concept and the argument that we were making and the reframing was radical, and that hopefully it would kind of shake the ground. But as a journalist, you also know you can put a lot of work into something and produce something really amazing and no one cares. So all of us have been surprised by the way that people have responded all across the country. We know that more than 280 schools across the country are teaching the 1619 Project curriculum. Every high school in Chicago is teaching the curriculum. Every high school in D.C. has received the curriculum. Every single state, there have been educators who have downloaded the curriculum. Of course, we have sold out of copies all across the country. We have a waiting list of about 30,000 people who are trying to get their hands on copies. And none of us could have predicted that. And I think what it speaks to is really a yearning to understand, but also the power of when you allow not just hire people of color in newsrooms, but actually empower those journalists to tell the stories that only they can tell and to lead a project. One of the most beautiful things about the 1619 Project is nearly every writer is black, all the photographers are black, all the poets and novelists are black, all the original artists produced by black artists, and it just reveals the amazing and high caliber of work that black folks can produce if we're given the opportunity and the resources to produce it. And also that it will not be journalism that is only consumed by other black people, that if you produce something that is high quality, that is intelligent, that respects the reader, that people of every race will actually want to engage with it, and that's what we've seen.
All right. A few more questions, I promise, then we'll be done. So I wrote down one. Again, 1619 reframes the story of African Americans in this country and deliberate attempt by those in power to diminish our history and how we impacted this country's development. So what, if anything, does this retelling of the story have on how we should relate to our African brothers and sisters, maybe across the waters and across the seas?
One thing, clearly, this project speaks to the whole diaspora. It is a story about America, but it is also a story about the diaspora. We were all on the same boats, just some of us got dropped off in different places. And what I hope that it will do is show that we have to take control of our own narratives, that as long as you are letting those who colonized and enslaved us be the ones to tell our stories and to shape the narratives of our resistance, of our contributions, then our stories are never going to be fully told. That is why the reaction, both positive and negative, has been so strong to the 1619 Project, because we are taking the people who have been treated as the bottom, the people who have been treated as kind of the drags on society, and actually showing that America would not be America without us. And you can look all across the Caribbean and see that this is true as well. And it wasn't just about kind of the brute labor, which we are given credit for that, picking cotton or growing sugar, but the intellectual development, the belief in the principles of democracy and the willingness to fight for them, contributions to science, medicine, none of these things are really largely recognized. And I hope that people of African descent all across the globe will take inspiration from that and try to work to make sure that we can overtake and be the ones who tell our own narrative.
Okay. And finally, when you were at Howard in, what was it, March for the Power of the Pen panel, you said that as a journalist you can remain objective. You cannot remain objective, but you can remain balanced and fair.
Yes.
And so, with the topic that was so powerful and endearing to your heart as the 1619 Project was, how were you able to remain focused and balanced and fair on delivering the content so that it comes in a very articulate way, but also telling the notions that needed to be heard in today's society?
I mean, it's the rigor of the scholarship. So you can disagree with the framing, but you can't disagree with the facts, right? And that's really what was important to me is we had a panel of scholars who helped us craft which stories we should tell. And we had a panel of scholars who fact-checked every single fact in detail in the project. And I know for my essay alone, I read 12 books and relied very heavily on academics and their scholarship. So what's important is we knew clearly that when you're going to do a radical reframing like this, when you're going to argue that black people are the true founding fathers, that black people actually are the only ones who truly believed in the words of the Constitution and the Declaration, that we are the perfecters of this democracy, that the people who have been treated as a problem from the moment we landed on these shores, that we are in fact the solution, you better come right with your facts. So we understood that people were going to be looking for any small error to try to tear apart the arguments that we were making. So we were very, very careful with the facts and very, very careful with the scholarship. So I don't really care if you disagree with the framing. I expected a lot of people, particularly conservative white people, to disagree with the framing, but they can't argue the facts, and that's really all that matters to me. If you're going to make an argument like this, you have to produce the highest caliber and quality of work, and that's what we did.
And that is exactly what you did. Thank you very much, Ms. Nikole Hannah Jones.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.